Okay, real quick, I'm just going to run you through my 420A Turbo Eclipse build. Currently, it's running about 9 psi of boost with no tune. Still the stock ECU over there. This is just a cheap $130 eBay turbo. It came with the oil lines, so that return line is the one that came with it. The feed line, I actually wanted this 90-degree angle here because it was hitting the hood and that was becoming a problem. So I got this for, I want to say like 15 bucks, and then it's just tapped into the head over here. So that's where I'm getting my oil feed, and then the other outlet is right here, and that runs to my oil pressure gauge, which normally you'd have hooked up to the pump, farther down in your oiling system, and it'd read a little bit higher than it does here. So typically driving, I'll see like 25, 30 psi, and at idle it'll drop down to 10 if the oil's hot. So as for oil that I'm using, it is currently on 5W50 Castrol full synthetic. It likes that a lot more than the 5W40 synthetic it was on earlier. In the head, I was only seeing like 5 psi while it was idling. It was really unhappy. Well, I wouldn't say unhappy. There's no, metal flakes or glitter in the oil when I drained it, but it was just a little too sketchy for me. So 5W50 was definitely the move. It is a little bit pricey. I ended up paying about $65 for the 5 quarts of it. But since this car doesn't have an oil cooler, it tends to get pretty hot. I ended up kind of doing this number right here where I got a heat sink and stuck it to the oil pan with thermal glue. It doesn't do a whole lot, but it's better than nothing. Maybe it dropped my oil temps by like 5 degrees, but you know what, I'll take it. Now my oil return line feeds into the oil pan right here. That is in between my AC compressor and my downpipe. It is a really tight fit. I would definitely recommend trying to just nudge your exhaust over a little more. The good thing is I ended up throwing a 2.5-inch flex pipe on here, so I can just kind of nudge it over if I need to, gives me the ability to do that. Let's see. Oh yeah, here's my vacuum line. I need to zip tie it one more time just because it's kind of loose and dangly right now, but it runs all the way back to my fuel management unit in the back, and then that wire is just for my battery because it's also been relocated to the back. Let's see. The exhaust setup is really nothing special. It's just 90-degree downpipe, flex pipe, and then that's actually that's actually a downpipe that I got off of my headers when I bought a set of headers and a downpipe for the car. I'm just running that. I turned it 90 degrees and then threw on just a Evil Energy muffler. Well, more like a resonator really. It's just packed with fiberglass, runs straight out the side. Haven't had any trouble with it yet. It does look like it's gonna melt my bumper. I promise you it hasn't, but it might start to someday. Let's see. The turbo I'm using is a T3, T4, and I believe it's also referred to as a TO4E. The compressor housing is a 0.5 aspect ratio, and exhaust housing is a 0.63 aspect ratio. Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to it other than that. It's just a Chinese wastegate. It's got an 8-pound spring in it, and then there's also a 3-pound spring that I weakened with a torch and threw that in it on top of the 8-pound spring. So one's skinny and one's fatter, so it just goes around the other, and you can put 2 springs in it. And it's somewhere in between 9 and 10 pounds right now. I have a line that goes from my intake manifold all the way down to it, and then there's just this little valve right here that I can open. And all that does is bleed off boost, and when I open it up, I see about 11 pounds of boost instead of the 9 that I normally see, so it's a little bit extra if I just want to do a good pull real quick. But I feel that the car honestly runs a lot better on 9 psi and just is a lot happier there. I don't see any detonation on the spark plugs at all. When I crank it up to 11, I see a little bit of peppering, but nothing major. And I think I am at the limit for the stock ECU. The injectors I'm running are Mustang injectors. They are 24 pounds an hour. The stock are 19 pounds an hour. This is one of the Mustang injectors I'm using. I bought a set of 8 off eBay for $70. They're slightly taller than the stock injector, but you won't have any trouble getting them to fit in the rail. I promise you, they hook up just fine and haven't had them leaking or anything. So I'm impressed with them. Also, if they do go out on you, you got 4 more. So there's always that. It is worth mentioning my intercooler piping and radiator currently. So my intercooler piping is, it looks like a mess, and it kind of is. This is just like a universal kit that I used, and I ran it all the way around, just down here, around to my intercooler, over yonder. You're gonna need a lot of 90-degree elbows, and then there's a 2-inch to 2.5-inch 90-degree silicone elbow right there on my turbo. It is a really tight fit between the fan and the downpipe. Yes, it does touch the downpipe just a little bit. Doesn't cause any issues. That's the hot side anyway. That air is already insanely hot. Can't do much more to it. Let's see here. What else do I have going on? Right, the boost line to my fuel management unit just runs right here to the turbo. You're actually going to see a little bit more pressure on the turbo outlet than you are in the manifold. That's why I actually ran my wastegate to the manifold, because when I see 8 psi of pressure here, it's actually going to be 8 psi of pressure going into the engine. If I see 8 psi of pressure on the turbo, and that's it pushing air through all the tubing and through my intercooler and everything, it's probably more like 6 psi in the manifold. But it does give you a little extra boost to run back to the fuel management unit, which will let you crank up your fuel pressure even more. So gives you a lot more range with that. I did have to sand down the plunger on the FMU. I had to take it apart for that, so that I could get a lower base fuel pressure. The lowest it'll let you do stock is about 30 psi, and I decapped my injectors, which was a stupid idea. Don't try it. But I basically had to run it at like 15 psi, so I had to sand down that plunger a little bit to drop my pressure more. I can show you the FMU real quick. It's not in a great location, if I'll be honest. Good Lord. And there it is, kind of rigged up. You'll have an inlet and an outlet, and it basically functions like a normal fuel pressure regulator. My fuel pressure regulator is actually bypassed, and it just runs through the FMU. I don't know if you can see where I have it bolted in. Actually, hold on. These fuel lines are a pain. It's probably the worst part of the build, is setting up the FMU, if I'll be honest. Get covered in gasoline a lot. So right there, I actually drilled a hole through the lip of the fuel tank. It doesn't leak or anything. It's welded. All that is welded, so you can just drill through the lip. And yeah, there's just a bolt there. It actually threaded in, which is surprising. I didn't expect to do that. I was gonna put a nut on the end of it, but it didn't need it, so it just ran like that. There's the FMU. The little brass screw is for adjusting your vacuum so that it can purge some of the vacuum or boost out of there. Yeah, and then that's all you do. And then this little screw in the center, I use an Allen key for, that's adjusting your base fuel pressure. I honestly probably mess with that a lot more than I do the little brass screw over here. That's really it for the FMU. I could show you how I have the fuel pressure regulator bypassed. It's kind of hard to see though. But basically, I don't have a fuel pressure regulator at all anymore. It's completely removed. Really hard to film. Yep. There you can see it. Just barely. Up there with the yellow Teflon. That threads into where the fuel pressure regulator was. And that yellow Teflon is specifically for gasoline. It looks like it might actually be leaking a little bit. I don't actually care. Let's see. And then that fuel line just runs straight to the FMU in the back. Let's see my gauges. They're literally just screwed into the dash right here. They're pretty sturdy. They're not going anywhere. And that one feels a little looser, but yeah, they're solid. And then as you can see the wiring, I literally just ran it through here. Just cut a little chunk out of this panel and then ran it under. And then way back here, somewhere I have a hole drilled out where all those lines and everything go through. Yeah, it looks kind of stupid, but there it is. Everything just runs through there. Since this was an auto car, I actually just ended up wiring up my gauges to the bulb that was on the shifter that lit it up at night. And that's been working fine, but if you do have a manual that was originally manual, I don't know what you could wire it to be honest. Probably the radio, that works fine, but hopefully you wouldn't draw too much power from it. Then another thing is this is a radiator out of a Dodge Neon, more of an upgraded radiator rather than the plastic factory ones. And I only did this because of the inlet and outlet being on the same side. I believe it's the same for the stock plastic 420A radiators. But obviously mine crapped out on me, so it's in the garbage now. It is only running the one fan. And yes, it is a very tight fit. It doesn't overheat in traffic or anything like that. It's actually been just fine. And having the smaller radiator actually gave me a little bit of room where my intercooler piping sticks out just a bit too far. But yeah, that's basically it. No tuning. Under full boost, I see like 85 PSI fuel pressure. At idle, it's sitting maybe 35. Another important thing is do not hook up this boost line to your fuel management unit at the manifold up here behind your throttle body. Otherwise, it will read vacuum and you'll have a very, very lean idle. Just because the vacuum affects your FMU just like boost does, except it's the opposite. I did have it hooked up right here where I have a vacuum cap on it now. I had it hooked up right there for a little while, but I could get more pressure from the turbo since it has to feed all that air through my intercooler piping. You know, if it's 8 or 9 PSI here, you might see like 14 PSI right here. So just having that extra range was very helpful. My FMU is basically almost maxed out. Like that little brass adjustment screw in there is pretty much bottomed out. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole build. I have some other miscellaneous stuff. I have a 25% underdrive pulley on it and all that. It's very fancy. Woohoo. But in order to get the turbo working, it's everything you need. And you also have to make sure that you have a good check valve or PCV valve right here on your manifold, well, on your valve cover, so that air pressure from the manifold doesn't just blow straight into your engine and give you crazy like crankcase pressure and blow oil out the breather. But yeah, that's basically it. It's a bit of a headache. Not too hard though.